It was through this online community that Maya found victim number 24. And this victim would change everything. Amanda Peterson had been lurking in the forum for days, reading every post, every story, wrestling with a decision that had been weighing on her for 10 years. She had known. Not everything, but enough. Enough to feel complicit. Enough to carry crushing guilt every single day since. When Amanda finally sent Maya a private message, it was 2 paragraphs that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. My name is Amanda Peterson. I worked as a medical records clerk at Brennan Women's Health Clinic from 2006 to 2011. I knew Dr. Brennan was doing something wrong. I saw him altering patient files, forging consent forms, documenting procedures that didn't match what the original records showed. I tried to report it once and he threatened to destroy my career, to accuse me of being the one falsifying records. I was 24 years old and terrified, so I kept my mouth shut. But I made copies. Before the clinic closed and they destroyed everything, I made backup copies of the original patient files. I've kept them all these years, not knowing what to do with them, too scared to come forward. If you're really trying to stop him, if there's really a chance to hold him accountable, I'll give you everything I have. Maya's hands were shaking so badly she could barely type her response. She immediately forwarded the message to Detective Martinez, then called her, even though it was 4 in the morning. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the hour. She was used to calls at odd times. Maya? What's wrong? I found something. Someone. A woman who worked at the clinic. She has the original records. The ones from before Brennan altered them. Sarah, this could be the proof we need. There was a pause, and Maya could almost hear Sarah sitting up in bed, reaching for her notepad. Tell me everything. 3 days later, Sarah and Jennifer sat across from Amanda Peterson in a secure interview room at the police station. Amanda was 39 years old now, but she looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. This was the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying an unbearable secret for far too long. She had brought 2 cardboard boxes with her, packed carefully with file folders, each one labeled with a patient name and date. 10 years of guilt, preserved in manila folders and photocopied documents. Amanda's voice was quiet but steady as she explained. I started working at the clinic in 2006, right out of community college. I was excited. It was my first real job in healthcare administration. At first, everything seemed normal. Dr. Brennan was respected, the clinic seemed professional, the staff was friendly. She paused, her hands folded tightly in her lap. But after about 6 months, I started noticing inconsistencies. Dr. Brennan would ask me to update patient files days or even weeks after procedures. He'd say things like, I forgot to note some additional findings, or, we need to clarify the consent documentation. At first, I thought it was just routine administrative cleanup. Sarah leaned forward. When did you realize it was more than that? Amanda's eyes filled with tears. There was a patient in early 2007. I'll never forget her name, Jasmine Rodriguez. She was 22, came in for an abortion. Standard first trimester procedure. I processed her consent forms, everything was straightforward. But 3 weeks later, Dr. Brennan called me into his office and handed me her file. He said there had been complications during the surgery, that he'd had to perform additional procedures, and that the consent forms needed to be updated to reflect that. She opened one of the boxes and pulled out 2 file folders. I had already made my own copy of her original file, not because I suspected anything yet, but because I was still learning the systems and wanted to keep examples of properly completed paperwork for reference. So I had her original consent form. Amanda spread 2 documents on the table. Sarah and Jennifer leaned in to look. The first document was a standard abortion consent form. The patient acknowledged understanding the procedure, the risks, the alternatives. At the bottom, a signature, Jasmine Rodriguez in clean, flowing handwriting. The second document looked similar at first glance, but the wording was different. This one included language about comprehensive reproductive surgery and possible hysterectomy if medically necessary. The signature at the bottom supposedly said Jasmine Rodriguez, but it was clearly different. Shakier, less confident, obviously written by a different hand. Jennifer picked up both documents, holding them up to the light, examining them closely. These signatures aren't even close. This is clear forgery. Amanda nodded, more tears spilling down her cheeks. That was the first time I knew for sure something was wrong. I confronted Dr. Brennan about it. Not aggressively, I was too scared for that, but I asked him why the consent forms were different. He got very calm, very cold. He told me that in medicine, documentation sometimes needs to be updated to reflect the full scope of treatment. He said that patients often don't fully understand or remember what they consented to, and that it was part of my job to maintain accurate records. He made it sound like I was the one who didn't understand how things worked. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. What happened next? I tried to talk to the practice manager, thinking maybe she could help me understand if this was normal. She shut me down immediately, told me to do my job and not ask questions. When I persisted, Dr. Brennan called me into his office again. This time he wasn't calm. He told me that if I continued to cause problems, he would tell the licensing board that I had been the one falsifying records. He had connections, resources, a spotless reputation. I was just a clerk with no proof and no credibility. Who would they believe? Amanda looked directly at Sarah and Jennifer, her voice breaking. I was 24 years old. I had student loans. I needed the job. I was terrified, so I did what he wanted. I updated the files. I kept my mouth shut, and I hated myself for it every single day. She gestured to the boxes. But I kept making copies. Every file that didn't look right, every consent form that seemed altered, every patient who I suspected might have been, I made backups. I told myself that someday, somehow, I would find a way to make it right. When the clinic closed in 2011 and they started destroying records, I managed to save these. I've kept them in my storage unit for 10 years, not knowing what to do with them, too scared to come forward because of his threats. But when I saw the news, when I saw that other women were finally speaking up, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Jennifer was already going through the files, her expression growing darker with each folder she opened. Amanda, how many files are we talking about? Amanda's voice was barely a whisper. 73. 73 women whose consent forms were altered after their procedures. 73 women who I believe had unauthorized surgeries. The room went silent. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. They had identified 23 victims through their investigation. Maya had found another 20 or so through her online outreach. But 73? The scope of Brennan's crimes was even more extensive than they had imagined. Sarah found her voice, though it came out hoarse. Amanda, you understand what this means? These files are direct evidence of forgery, of falsification of medical records, of systematic fraud. This is exactly what we needed. Amanda nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I knew something was wrong. I knew he was hurting people. And I didn't do anything. I let it happen. I helped him cover it up. I've lived with that guilt every day for 10 years. If I had been braver, if I had spoken up sooner, maybe some of these women. Her voice broke completely and she put her face in her hands, sobbing. Jennifer moved around the table, placing a hand on Amanda's shoulder. You were young. You were threatened and intimidated by someone with power over your career and your life. You were a victim too, Amanda. What matters is that you're coming forward now. What matters is that you kept these records. Because of you, we can finally prove what he did. Because of you, these women will get justice. Amanda looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I just want to make it right. I want him to pay for what he did. I want all those women to know the truth. Sarah stood, looking at the boxes of files with a mixture of horror and hope. You've just given us the strongest evidence we could have asked for. Original documents showing consent for one procedure, altered documents showing consent for another, all in Dr. Brennan's own patient files. This is the smoking gun. Over the next week, Sarah, Jennifer, and their team worked around the clock analyzing Amanda's files. They brought in forensic document experts who confirmed what was obvious even to the naked eye. The signatures on the altered consent forms were forgeries. The handwriting didn't match the original documents. In some cases, they could even determine that the forms had been photocopied, altered, and then photocopied again to hide the changes. The pattern was consistent and damning. Young women, predominantly low income, predominantly women of color, coming in for routine procedures. Original consent forms documenting straightforward treatments. Altered forms, created days or weeks after the procedures, documenting extensive surgeries and emergency interventions that the patients had never actually agreed to. It was systematic fraud on a massive scale. Jennifer began filing formal charges. Not just medical malpractice anymore. Now they were looking at aggravated assault, organ theft, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and violations of federal organ trafficking laws. These weren't civil matters anymore. These were serious felonies that could put Brennan away for the rest of his life. But building the case was only half the battle. Now they had to go public. The media firestorm began with a single press conference on a Tuesday morning in downtown Hartford. The state attorney's office had called the press briefing, and reporters from every major news outlet in the region packed into the conference room. Jennifer Kim stood at the podium, flanked by Detective Martinez and Captain Chin. Behind them, a screen displayed a carefully redacted case summary with the key numbers that told the horrifying story. 73 suspected victims, 15 years of crimes, millions of dollars in fraudulent research funding. Jennifer's voice was steady and clear as she addressed the cameras. Today, the state of Connecticut is filing criminal charges against Dr. Richard Brennan, age 67, for crimes including aggravated assault, organ theft, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Our investigation has uncovered evidence that for over a decade, Dr. Brennan systematically performed unauthorized hysterectomies on patients who came to his clinic seeking routine reproductive health care. These women did not consent to these procedures. Many were never informed that the procedures had been performed. Dr. Brennan then falsified medical records to cover up his crimes and used the harvested tissue for privately funded research. The room erupted with questions from reporters, all shouting at once. Jennifer held up a hand. We believe there are at least 73 victims, though that number may rise as more women come forward. We are urging any woman who received treatment at Brennan Women's Health Clinic between 2003 and 2011 to contact our office. We have set up a dedicated hotline for potential victims. She paused, her expression hardening. What Dr. Brennan did represents one of the most egregious violations of medical ethics and patient trust in modern history. These women came to him seeking help, seeking care, and he violated them in the most intimate way imaginable. He stole parts of their bodies. He stole their choices. He stole their futures. And he did it all while hiding behind the authority and trust that comes with being a physician. By that evening, the story had gone national. Every major news network picked it up. Cable news shows dedicated entire segments to it. Social media exploded with outrage and support for the victims. Renowned fertility researcher accused of stealing organs from patients. Doctor faces charges in decades-long medical horror, 73 women, the shocking scale of one doctor's crimes. The headlines grew more sensational with each hour, but the core facts remained consistent and damning. A respected doctor had systematically violated vulnerable women for over a decade, and he was finally being held accountable. Within 2 days, protests formed outside Meridian Biotechnology Research Facility where Brennan currently worked. Dozens of women, many holding signs that read, "My body is not your research, justice for victims, and doctors should heal, not steal." Brennan's attorneys released a statement late that second day, carefully worded and deeply insulting to everyone who had been following the case. Dr. Richard Brennan categorically denies all allegations made against him. Throughout his distinguished 40-year career, Dr. Brennan has provided compassionate care to thousands of patients and contributed groundbreaking research to the medical field. The allegations being made are based on unreliable memories from procedures that occurred many years ago. In every case where Dr. Brennan performed a hysterectomy, it was medically necessary to protect the patient's health and life. All procedures were properly documented and consented to. We are confident that when the facts are fully examined, Dr. Brennan will be completely exonerated. The statement enraged the victims and their supporters. Unreliable memories? These women had medical proof that their organs were gone. They had original consent forms showing what they had actually agreed to. The arrogance of the statement, the dismissiveness of it, only fueled the public outrage. More women came forward. The hotline that had been set up received hundreds of calls in the first week. Some were from women who had been treated at Brennan's clinic and were now wondering if they had been victimized. Others were from women who had already known something was wrong but had been too scared to speak up. The count of confirmed victims climbed. 23 became 35 became 47. Each new victim meant another interview, another statement, another piece of evidence to add to the case. But while the investigation was moving forward with momentum, the toll it was taking on the people at the center of it was devastating. And nowhere was that more apparent than in Maya Alvarez's home. Maya hadn't slept a full night in weeks, maybe months. She couldn't remember anymore. Time had become this strange, fluid thing where days blended together in a haze of phone calls, interviews, forum posts, and emails. She would look up from her computer and realize it was 3 in the morning. Then she'd blink and suddenly James would be standing in the doorway telling her it was time to pick up Carlos from school, and she'd realize she'd lost an entire day. Her home office had become command central for the victim outreach effort. The walls were covered with printouts, timelines, victim statements. Her desk was buried under file folders, sticky notes with names and dates, printed emails. Her laptop was always open, always glowing, always pulling her back in. James tried to be supportive. He really did. In the beginning he had encouraged her, told her she was doing something important, something brave. But as the weeks turned into months and he watched his wife disappear further and further into the investigation, his support turned to concern, and then to fear. He found her again at 3 a.m, just like he had so many times before. She was hunched over her laptop, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen, her eyes bloodshot and unfocused. Around her were scattered papers, half-empty coffee cups, a dinner plate he had brought her hours ago that she hadn't touched. Maya. She didn't look up, didn't even seem to hear him. Her fingers kept typing, kept scrolling. Maya. Louder this time. She jumped, startled, finally looking at him. For a moment she seemed confused about where she was, why he was there. James? What time is it? It's 3 a.m. Again. His voice was gentle but firm. You need to stop. You need to sleep. You need to take care of yourself. Maya looked back at her screen, her jaw tightening. I just need to finish this. There's a woman in Massachusetts who thinks she might have been at the clinic in 2009, and if I can just verify her dates. Maya, stop. James moved into the room, gently closing her laptop despite her protest. You can't keep doing this. Look at yourself. When was the last time you ate a real meal? When was the last time you slept more than 2 hours? When was the last time you spent time with your son? Maya felt something crack inside her chest at that last question. Carlos. Her beautiful 6-year-old boy who she loved more than life itself. When had she last really been present with him? When had she last read him a bedtime story, played with him in the backyard, just sat with him without her mind being somewhere else? The tears came suddenly, violently. All the stress, all the trauma, all the guilt and anger and exhaustion that she had been pushing down for months came flooding out. She collapsed forward, her face in her hands, sobbing so hard her entire body shook. James was there immediately, his arms around her, holding her as she fell apart. He took my choice, Maya gasped out between sobs. He took my choice to have another child. He took futures from dozens of women. He took parts of our bodies like we were nothing, like we didn't matter, like we were just resources for him to use. How do I just stop? How do I just move on knowing what he did? James held her tighter and she could feel him crying too now. You don't have to stop fighting for justice. But you're destroying yourself. You're not eating, not sleeping, barely functioning. You're going to make yourself sick. And Maya? His voice broke. Carlos asked me yesterday why mommy is always sad now. He asked if he did something wrong, if you were mad at him. Maya felt like someone had punched her in the chest. Her baby. Her sweet, innocent little boy who had nothing to do with any of this, who was suffering because his mother couldn't let go of her pain. I'm a terrible mother, she whispered. No. James pulled back to look at her, his hands on her shoulders. You are an amazing mother and an incredibly strong woman. But you're carrying too much. You're trying to save everyone and you're losing yourself in the process. You need help, Maya. You need to let the professionals handle this investigation. You need to take care of yourself so you can be there for your family. Maya knew he was right. She could feel how close she was to the edge, how much this was consuming her. But every time she thought about stepping back, she saw the faces of all those other women. Women who had been violated just like her. Women who deserved justice. Women who needed someone to fight for them. She was still crying, still trembling in James's arms when her phone rang. At 3 a.m. She almost didn't answer, but then she saw the name on the screen, Detective Sarah Martinez. Sarah never called this late unless it was important. Maya pulled away from James, wiping her eyes, and answered the call. Sarah? Sarah's voice was serious, professional, but Maya could hear the tension underneath. Maya, I'm sorry to call so late. But we're filing formal charges tomorrow. The grand jury has reviewed the evidence and they've issued indictments. We're moving forward with prosecution. Maya felt her breath catch. This was it. After months of investigation, after all the pain and work and sleepless nights, they were actually going to trial. That's good news, right? It's very good news. But Maya, I need to be honest with you. The defense is going to come at us hard. They're going to try to discredit every victim. They're going to argue that memories are unreliable, that procedures were medically necessary, that we're conducting a witch hunt. It's going to be brutal. And we need you to testify. You were one of the first victims to come forward. Your testimony will be crucial. Sarah paused, and Maya could hear the concern in her voice when she continued. But I need to know if you can handle this. Because Maya, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. They're going to question everything about you, your character, your memory, your motives. They're going to try to make you look unreliable. They're going to make you relive your trauma in front of a courtroom full of strangers. Are you prepared for that? Maya looked at James, who was watching her with a mixture of concern and something else. Maybe pride, maybe fear, maybe both. She thought about Carlos sleeping peacefully in his room down the hall, innocent and safe. She thought about all the other women who were depending on her to be strong, to tell the truth, to fight. She thought about what James had said. About losing herself. About sacrificing her family for this crusade. But she also thought about what would happen if she didn't testify. If she walked away now after everything. If Dr. Brennan won because she wasn't brave enough to face him in court. She took a deep breath, wiping the last tears from her face. I'll do it. Whatever it takes. I'll testify. She could hear Sarah's sigh of relief on the other end of the line. Okay, we'll prepare you. We'll make sure you're ready. And Maya, thank you. What you're doing, what all the victims are doing by coming forward, it's incredibly brave. Maya hung up and looked at James. He looked exhausted and scared, but he nodded slowly. If you're going to do this, then we'll do it together. But after the trial, after this is over, you need to promise me something. What? You need to let yourself heal. You need to get therapy. You need to take care of yourself. Because I can't lose you to this. Carlos can't lose you. Promise me. Maya reached for his hand, squeezing it tight. I promise. After the trial, I'll focus on healing. On our family. On moving forward. But right now, I need to see this through. James pulled her close again, holding her in the darkness of her cluttered office. Then let's see it through. The truth was coming to light. The victims were being heard. The evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Richard Brennan was finally going to face justice for his crimes. But the hardest part was still ahead. The trial. The testimony. The moment when Maya and all the other victims would have to stand up in front of their attacker and tell their stories, knowing that every word would be scrutinized, every detail questioned, every emotion judged. If this story has shocked you, if you believe that doctors who violate their patients' trust deserve to face the full consequences of their actions, then I need you to hit that subscribe button right now, because the trial that's about to unfold will be one of the most dramatic and emotionally devastating courtroom battles you've ever heard about. The evidence was overwhelming. The victims were ready to testify. But would it be enough to bring down a doctor who had spent 40 years building an untouchable reputation? The answer to that question would determine not just Dr. Brennan's fate, but whether the 73 women he violated would finally get the justice they deserved. Not with anger, but with simple statements of fact. We won. Justice was served. You didn't break us. Brennan didn't look back. He was led through the doors and out of the courtroom, beginning his journey to federal prison where he would spend the rest of his life. Behind him, in that packed courtroom, 47 women embraced each other, cried together, and celebrated the justice they had fought so hard to achieve. 6 months after the trial, life had begun to take on a new normalcy for Maya Alvarez. She and James had started the adoption process. After everything she had been through, after all the trauma and stress and fighting, Maya had realized that she still wanted to expand her family. Not because she felt she needed to replace what had been stolen from her, but because she had so much love to give and there were children who needed families. The adoption process was complicated and sometimes frustrating, but it felt like building something positive out of the ashes of trauma. It felt like reclaiming her future on her own terms. Maya had also become an advocate for patient rights and informed consent laws. She spoke at medical conferences, testified before legislative committees, and worked with healthcare organizations to develop better protocols for protecting patients. Her story had become a powerful tool for education and reform. The Maya Alvarez Act had been introduced in the Connecticut State Legislature and was gaining support. The proposed law would require video recording of all surgical consent processes, ensuring that there would always be clear documentation of exactly what patients agreed to. It would mandate independent review of any procedure that deviated from the original consent. It would create stronger penalties for falsification of medical records. It would establish better oversight of private medical research facilities. It wouldn't bring back what had been stolen from Maya and the other victims. But it would make it much harder for anyone to commit similar crimes in the future. Detective Sarah Martinez had been promoted to lead a new medical crimes task force within the state police. The Brennan case had revealed systemic failures in how medical abuse was reported, investigated, and prosecuted. Sarah's new position would focus on developing better protocols for identifying and investigating medical crimes, training officers in how to handle sensitive medical cases, and working with healthcare institutions to improve reporting mechanisms. She stayed in touch with Maya, not just as a former case contact but as a friend. They had been through something profound together, and that bond would last. The support group for Brennan's victims continued to meet regularly. Some women came every week, finding comfort in sharing their experiences with others who truly understood. Others came occasionally, checking in during difficult moments. The group had become a community, women who had been victimized by the same man, who had fought for justice together, and who were now healing together. Some of the women had used their settlement money to pursue fertility options like surrogacy or adoption. Others had decided that motherhood wasn't for them after all, and that was okay too. The point was that they were making their own choices now, reclaiming the autonomy that had been stolen from them. Maya often thought about what she had learned through this experience. About the importance of believing victims. About the courage it takes to speak up when powerful people don't want you to. About the strength that comes from women supporting each other. About the fact that justice, while never enough to fully heal the harm, matters deeply. One evening, Maya stood in front of a packed auditorium at a medical ethics conference. She was one of the keynote speakers, invited to share her story and discuss the implications for patient rights and medical oversight. She stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of doctors, nurses, medical students, and healthcare administrators. 6 months ago, the idea of speaking publicly about what had happened to her would have been terrifying. But now she had found her voice and her purpose. "He took something from me I can never get back," Maya began, her voice clear and strong. "But he couldn't take my voice. He couldn't take my strength. And he couldn't stop me from making sure this never happens to anyone else." She spoke for 30 minutes, detailing not just what had happened to her, but what it revealed about systemic failures in medical oversight, about power imbalances between doctors and patients, about the importance of truly informed consent, about the need for better mechanisms to report and investigate medical abuse. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted several minutes. Afterward, dozens of people approached her, some to thank her for her bravery, others to ask how they could support similar reforms in their own institutions, still others to quietly confide their own experiences with medical abuse or coercion. Maya listened to each person, gave what advice and support she could, and felt a deep sense of purpose. This was her new mission. This was how she would build meaning from trauma. Later that evening, Maya arrived home to find James in the kitchen making dinner, and Carlos at the table doing homework. It was a perfectly ordinary scene, the kind of everyday moment that Maya had learned to cherish. But there was something different tonight. An extra chair at the table. A small backpack in the corner. A drawing on the refrigerator that hadn't been there this morning. Maria was 7 years old, with dark hair and curious brown eyes. She had been placed with Maya and James 2 weeks ago as a foster child, with the possibility of adoption. She was shy but sweet, slowly learning to trust her new family. Maya sat down at the table next to Maria, looking at the drawing she was working on, a house with a family standing in front of it. "Is that us?" Maya asked gently. Maria nodded, not making eye contact but clearly pleased by the question. "That's beautiful." Carlos looked up from his homework. "I helped her color it. I showed her where all the crayons are." Maya felt her heart swell. Her son, her beautiful compassionate son, was welcoming this little girl into their family with open arms. James brought dinner to the table and they sat together as a family, not perfect, not without trauma and loss, but together, building something new, creating something beautiful out of pain. Later, after the children were in bed, Maya sat with James on their back porch, looking up at the stars. "Do you think about it still?" James asked quietly. "What he took from you?" Maya was quiet for a moment, considering. "Every day," she admitted. "I think I always will. That loss is part of me now. But it's not the only part. I'm also the woman who fought back, who found her voice, who helped bring down a predator and protect future patients, who's building a new family through adoption, who's using her story to create change." She turned to look at James. "He took something from me, but I built something new. And that's how we win." James pulled her close and they sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had been through hell and come out the other side stronger. The story of Dr. Richard Brennan's crimes would be studied in medical schools and ethics classes for years to come. It would be cited in debates about medical oversight and patient rights. It would serve as a cautionary tale about what happens when authority goes unchecked and vulnerable people are treated as resources rather than human beings. But for Maya and the other 47 victims, it was more than a case study. It was their lives, their bodies, their loss, their fight, their victory. Dr. Richard Brennan was currently serving his sentence at FCI Cumberland, a medium-security federal prison in Maryland. He would be there for the rest of his life, his distinguished reputation destroyed, his name forever associated with his crimes. The 47 victims had each received their portion of the settlement, Not enough to compensate for what had been stolen, but at least some acknowledgement of the harm done. New medical oversight laws had been enacted in 12 states, inspired by the Brennan case and the advocacy work of his victims. These laws strengthened consent requirements, improved record-keeping protocols, and created better mechanisms for investigating medical abuse. The pharmaceutical company that had funded Brennan's research had settled civil lawsuits with the victims for an undisclosed amount and had implemented new ethical review processes for all future research partnerships. And most importantly, 47 women who had been victimized, silenced, and violated had found their voices, told their stories, and proved that even the most powerful predators could be held accountable. Justice had been served. Not perfect justice, nothing could undo the harm that had been done. But justice nonetheless. And for women like Maya Alvarez who had faced down their abuser in court and won, that meant everything. If this story has moved you, if you believe that medical professionals who abuse their power must face consequences, if you believe that victims' voices matter, if you believe that systematic change is possible when brave people speak up, then please hit that subscribe button right now. Share this story. Let it remind you that justice, while difficult and painful to pursue, is possible. And remember, in your own life and the lives of your loved ones, to always advocate for yourself in medical settings. Ask questions. Demand clear answers. Never be afraid to seek second opinions. Your body is yours and no one, no matter how much authority they have, has the right to violate your autonomy without your fully informed consent.